An exhausted single dad. A pale woman with bruises on her face. A decision made in seconds. What Daniel handed over that cold morning wasn't just food. It was the last line between life and death for a stranger. A woman planning to give up everything while fleeing from a terror no one could see. A terror that would have won if he hadn't looked out the window at that instant. This is the story of how ignoring his own hunger saved a life and revealed a secret kept for years. The morning came cold and gray, the kind that seeps into your bones before you even step outside. Frost clung to the edges of the diner window like crystallized breath, each pane rimmed with ice that caught the weak November light and turned it silver. Inside, the warmth was artificial buzzing fluorescent lights overhead and the hiss of the ancient coffee machine struggling to stay alive in the corner. The air smelled like burnt toast and old grease, bacon that had been cooking since 5 a.m., and the faint metallic tang of tap water run through pipes that had seen better decades. But to Daniel Cooper, sitting alone in the corner booth with his hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, it smelled like a small victory. He'd been coming to Murphy's Diner for 3 years now, ever since Mia started kindergarten, and he'd needed a place between the night shift and the morning drop-off where he could sit, breathe, and pretend for 20 minutes that he wasn't drowning. The booth had become his no one ever sat there anymore. Sandra knew. She'd leave him alone until his coffee was half gone. Then she'd appear with the pot and a nod, no words needed. This morning, though, was different. His jacket hung on the hook beside him, too thin for November, but the only one he owned that still had all its buttons. Beneath it, his work shirt navy blue, embroidered with Cooper above the breast pocket, was stained with grease and sweat from the double shift he'd just finished. His hands were rough, calloused from years of warehouse work, lifting boxes and loading trucks, and doing the kind of labor that broke men's backs by 50. His nails were permanently stained, dark crescents of grime that no amount of scrubbing could fully erase. On the table in front of him sat a white ceramic plate, steam still rising faintly from its surface. 2 eggs, sunny side up, yolk still soft and golden. 3 strips of bacon, crisp at the edges, glistening with fat. 2 pieces of toast, buttered and cut diagonally. A small pile of hash browns, still steaming, flecked with black pepper and paprika. It wasn't much. Objectively, it was nothing $7.50 worth of diner food. But for Daniel, it was everything. He hadn't eaten a real breakfast in 6 weeks. Not since the hospital bills started coming in white envelopes with red stamps and threatening language about collections. Not since Mia's asthma had turned from manageable to serious, from 1 inhaler to 3, from monthly checkups to biweekly visits when her little chest would tighten and her lips would turn blue and he'd have to carry her to the car in the middle of the night, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Every dollar went to her. Every single one. Instant noodles for him, the kind that cost 19 cents a pack. Peanut butter sandwiches if he was lucky. Black coffee, no sugar. Water from the tap. He'd lost 12 pounds in 2 months, his belt cinched to a new hole he'd punched himself with a screwdriver. But today was different. Today, he'd gotten his paycheck early in accident in accounting, but one he wasn't going to question. Today, he'd stopped at Murphy's and ordered breakfast. Real breakfast. The kind with protein and warmth and the taste of something other than salt and preservatives. He'd been staring at the plate for almost a full minute now, fork in hand, trying to decide where to start. The eggs, maybe, or the bacon. God, the bacon. He picked up his fork. And that's when he saw her. She stood just outside the diner window, barely visible through the frost and condensation, trembling. Not from the cold alone, though her clothes were entirely too light for late November, a thin gray cardigan over a wrinkled white blouse, jeans that were frayed at the hems and stained at the knees, no coat, no scarf, no gloves. Her arms were wrapped around herself, hands tucked under her armpits. shoulders hunched against the wind that whipped through the parking lot and sent fast food wrappers tumbling across the asphalt. No, this was something deeper. Her whole body shook like a leaf barely clinging to a branch in the last storm of autumn, violent and uncontrollable. Like she was coming apart from the inside. Daniel set his fork down slowly, eyes fixed on her. Her face was pale, almost gray in the morning light. Eyes hollow and red-rimmed, sunk deep into shadowed sockets. Her hair hung limp and unwashed around her face, dark roots showing through what might have once been blonde. She stared at nothing or everything, lips moving silently, forming words only she could hear, as if she were having a conversation with ghosts that crowded around her in the cold. She swayed slightly, one hand leaving her body to brace against the frosted window for balance. The other hand clutched a small, battered brown purse to her chest, fingers white-knuckled, like it was the only thing tethering her to the earth. She looked lost. No, she looked like she'd been lost for a very long time and had only just realized there was no map, no path, no way back. Daniel's throat tightened. He watched her for another few seconds, his mind racing through calculations he didn't want to make. The rent was due in 4 days. Mia needed new shoes. Her toes were starting to poke through the ones she had. The electric bill was overdue. The car needed an oil change. He'd skipped meals for weeks to afford this one plate of food, this one moment of normalcy. He deserved this, didn't he? He'd worked for it, earned it, sacrificed for it. But then the woman outside shifted, her knees buckling slightly, and she caught herself against the glass, fingers splayed, breath fogging the window. And Daniel didn't think anymore. Thinking would have stopped him. Thinking would have reminded him of all the reasons to look away, to finish his breakfast, to let someone else help her. But he didn't think. He just stood up, picked up the plate, and walked toward the door. The cold hit him like a fist the moment he pushed through the door, the wind cutting through his thin work shirt and stealing the warmth from his skin in seconds. But he barely felt it. His focus was entirely on the woman, who flinched violently at the sound of the door chime, turning toward him with wide, frightened eyes like a deer caught in headlights. "Excuse me," Daniel said quietly, his voice almost lost in the wind. She stared at him, mouth opening slightly, but no sound came out. Up close, he could see more now. The bruise on her left cheekbone faded to a sickly yellow-green but still visible. The split in her lower lip, scabbed over but recent. The way her hand shook even harder now that someone had noticed her, seen her, acknowledged that she existed. Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Here," Daniel interrupted gently, holding out the plate with both hands like an offering. "Please, take this." She stared at the food like it was something from another planet. Her eyes darted from the eggs to the bacon to his face and back again, confusion and suspicion and desperate hunger all warring in her expression. "You need it more than I do," he said, his voice steady despite the way his stomach was already starting to clench with regret he couldn't afford to feel. For a long, terrible moment, she didn't move. Just stood there, trembling, lips forming words she couldn't say. Then, slowly, so slowly, her trembling fingers reached out and took the plate from his hands. The weight of it seemed to surprise her, and she gripped it tighter, pulling it close to her chest. Her eyes filled with tears. "I don single quotes T. double," she whispered, voice breaking. "I can't pay you. I don't have any money. I don't have anything." "I'm not asking you to," Daniel said softly. She looked up at him then, really looked at him, searching his face for some kind of trick, some hidden cost, some cruelty waiting beneath the kindness. But all she found was exhaustion and something softer, something that looked a lot like understanding. Like he knew what it felt like to have nothing. Like he knew what it meant to be invisible. "Thank you," she breathed, and the words came out like a prayer, like a sob, like something she hadn't said in so long she'd forgotten how. Daniel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. If he spoke, he might ask questions. Where are you staying? Are you safe? Do you need help? And questions might scare her away, might make her think he wanted something in return. So he just stepped back, gave her a small, tired smile, and turned toward the diner door. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Inside, the warmth hit him again, but it felt different now, emptier. He walked back to his booth on legs that felt heavier than they had 5 minutes ago and sat down staring at the empty space where his breakfast had been. The coffee was still there, cooling now, a film forming on its surface. He wrapped both hands around the mug and took a slow sip, letting the bitter heat slide down his throat. His stomach growled, loud enough that the man in the next booth glanced over. Daniel ignored it. A minute passed. Then 2. Then Sandra appeared at his side, her weathered face creased with something between exasperation and affection. She was in her 50s, hair going gray at the temples, a permanent limp from a car accident a decade ago that had left her with a knee that never quite healed right. She'd been working at Murphy's longer than Daniel had been alive, and she knew every regular by name, by order, by story. Did you just... She gestured toward the window with the coffee pot in her hand. Daniel nodded, not looking up. Sandra sighed a long, heavy sound that carried more understanding than judgment, and shook her head. She walked away without another word. 2 minutes later, she was back, setting a to-go cup of fresh coffee and a wrapped bagel in front of him. "On the house," she said quietly, squeezing his shoulder. "You're too good for your own good, Cooper." He looked up at her, throat tight. "Thanks, Sandra." She gave him a sad, knowing smile and walked away, her limp more pronounced than usual. Daniel unwrapped the bagel slowly. It wasn't eggs and bacon, but it was something. It was warm and it was food and it was given freely, and that counted for something. He ate slowly, mechanically, glancing once toward the window. The woman was gone. The plate sat on the ground where she'd been standing, scraped clean. If you believe that kindness still matters in this world, that even small gestures can shift the weight of impossible days and open doors that no one saw coming, then stay with this story. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Your support helps us keep telling stories like this, stories that prove compassion isn't weakness, it's power. It's the thread that holds us all together when everything else is falling apart. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest Daniel had ever known. And that was saying something. Mia's asthma flared up twice in the span of 10 days. The first time, he'd managed it at home, sitting up with her all night while she used her nebulizer, his hand on her small back as she coughed and wheezed and cried because she couldn't catch her breath. He'd sung to her old songs his mother used to sing to him, and eventually, just before dawn, she'd fallen asleep against his chest. The second time was worse. It happened at 2 a.m. on a Thursday. Daniel woke to the sound of her gasping, a horrible wet rattling sound that made his blood run cold. He'd thrown on clothes, scooped her into his arms, and driven to the IA with his hazard lights on, one hand on the wheel and the other holding her against him as she struggled to breathe. Her little fingers digging into his shirt, they'd kept her overnight. Oxygen, steroids, monitoring. She'd looked so small in that hospital bed, surrounded by wires and beeping machines, her dark curls spread across the pillow. Daniel had sat in the chair beside her bed and watched her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her chest, terrified that if he looked away, if he closed his eyes for even a second, she'd stop. When they'd finally released her the next afternoon, the discharge nurse had handed him a stack of papers and a new bill, another mountain to climb, another impossibility to figure out. He'd nodded, signed where they told him to sign, and carried Mia out to the car. At home, she'd clung to him on the couch, small and warm and alive, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Daddy." "For what, baby?" "For costing so much money." His heart had broken clean in half. "Don't you ever apologize for that," he'd said fiercely, holding her tighter. "You hear me? Never. She'd nodded against his chest, but he could feel the weight of guilt in her small body, the awareness that children her age shouldn't have. He picked up more shifts at the warehouse. Stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night. His body ached in places he didn't know could ache, his lower back, his shoulders, his hands. He developed a persistent cough that he ignored. His coworkers started asking if he was okay. He lied and said he was fine. But some nights, when the apartment was quiet and Mia was asleep in the next room and the bills were spread across the kitchen table like accusations, he thought about the woman outside the diner. He wondered if she'd eaten the food, if it had helped even a little. He wondered if she was safe now, if she'd found shelter, if someone else had helped her. He told himself it didn't matter, that he'd done what he could with what he had, and that was enough, that he couldn't save everyone, that his own daughter had to come first. But deep down, in the part of him that still believed the world could be kind, he hoped she was okay. He hoped she'd found her way home. And then, 5 weeks and 3 days after that cold November morning, the letter arrived. It came on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked in with the usual stack of bills and junk mail. Daniel found it when he got home from his shift, dirty and exhausted, Mia at the neighbor's house until he could shower and change. The envelope was different, immediately thick, cream-colored paper, expensive looking. No return address. His name and address were printed in elegant script across the front. He stood in the narrow hallway outside his apartment, keys still in hand, staring at it. His first thought, debt collector trying to look legitimate. His second thought, eviction notice dressed up fancy. His third thought, hospital lawsuit. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of matching paper, typed, formal, brief. Mr. Daniel Cooper, you are respectfully requested to appear at the offices of Harmon and Associates, Legal Counsel, this Friday, December 10th, at 2 p.m. This matter concerns a personal issue of significant importance to your immediate future. Please bring valid identification. This meeting is mandatory. Failure to appear may result in forfeiture of assistance. Sincerely, Jonathan Harmon, Esquire. Daniel read it 3 times. Then he sat down on the floor, right there in the hallway, the letter still in his hands, and tried to breathe through the panic rising in his chest. He couldn't eat that night. Couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario. Maybe someone had reported him for something, leaving Mia with neighbors too often, working too many hours something. Maybe there was a problem with her medical records, with the insurance, with the hospital payments. Maybe the warehouse was being sued and somehow he was implicated. Maybe. None of the maybes were good. Friday came too fast and too slow. The days in between stretched thin with anxiety. He asked Mrs. Alvarez, his elderly neighbor who watched Mia sometimes, if she could pick her up from school and keep her for a few hours. He didn't explain why. Didn't want to worry her. Didn't want to say it out loud and make it more real. Of course, Mio, she'd said, patting his arm with her soft, wrinkled hand. You take care of what you need to. The address led him downtown to a part of the city he rarely visited. Tall glass buildings that caught the winter sun and threw it back in blinding sheets. People in expensive suits walking fast, talking into phones, eyes focused on things Daniel couldn't see and would never touch. He felt painfully out of place in his cleanest pair of jeans and a button-down shirt he'd ironed twice, borrowed from a neighbor because his own work shirts weren't appropriate. The building was all glass and steel, modern and cold. The lobby had marble floors that echoed with every footstep. A security desk. Elevators with mirrors. 9th floor. The elevator ride felt like it took hours. When the doors opened, he stepped into a hallway lined with dark wood and soft lighting. Framed diplomas and certificates on the walls. Thick carpet that swallowed sound. At the end of the hall, Harmon and Associates, Legal Counsel. He pushed through the glass door. Inside, everything was polished. Wood and leather and the smell of expensive coffee. A reception desk that looked like it cost more than Daniel's car. A woman behind it, immaculate in a gray suit, smiled at him, polite, professional, distant. "Daniel Cooper," he said, his voice barely steady. "I have an appointment at 2. She glanced at her computer, nodded. "Yes, Mr. Cooper. Please have a seat. Mr. Harmon will see you shortly." He sat in one of the leather chairs, hands on his knees, leg bouncing. His palms were sweating. His heart hammered against his ribs. 10 minutes felt like an hour. "Mr. Cooper?" A man appeared in the doorway to the left, mid-50s, silver hair perfectly styled, sharp charcoal suit, warm eyes that didn't quite match the formality of his appearance. He extended a hand. "I'm Jonathan Harmon." "Thank you for coming." Daniel stood quickly, shook his hand, tried not to seem as terrified as he felt. Sure, of course. Please, follow me." They walked down another hallway, this one lined with closed doors bearing names and titles. At the end, Harmon opened a door into a large conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a long table of dark wood, leather chairs. And sitting at the table, hands folded in front of her, looking healthier but still somehow fragile, was her. The woman from the diner. Daniel stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. She looked up, her eyes met his. And she smiled small, trembling, real. "Mr. Cooper," Harmon said gently, gesturing toward one of the chairs across from her. "This is Elena Castellano." Daniel couldn't move, couldn't speak. "Please," Harmon continued, "sit." Daniel sat, his eyes never leaving her face. She looked different. Cleaner. Yes, her hair washed and pulled back, her clothes simple but neat. But it was more than that. There was color in her cheeks now. The bruise was gone. Her hands, folded on the table, were still. But her eyes held the same pain he'd seen that morning, the same exhaustion, the same weight. "Hello," she said softly. Her voice was stronger now, but still carried the echo of whatever had broken her. "Hi," Daniel managed. I don't understand." Harmon sat down beside Elena, opened a leather folder in front of him. "Ms. Castellano reached out to our firm approximately 3 weeks ago with a rather unique request. She wanted to locate a man who had helped her during a particularly difficult moment. She provided a description, a location, a date. We were able to identify you through diner security footage and cross-referencing with public records." Daniel's head spun. "Security footage? Why would you—" Elena leaned forward slightly. "Because I needed to thank you," she said, her voice catching. "And because I needed to tell you what you did. I just ... It was breakfast. I gave you breakfast. You gave me more than that," she said, tears welling in her eyes now. "You gave me a reason to keep going." She took a shaky breath and began. "I was married for 17 years, to a man I thought I loved. A man I thought loved me. But somewhere along the way, he changed. Or maybe I just finally saw who he really was." Her hands tightened. "He hurt me. For years. Controlled me. Isolated me from my family, from my friends. Made me believe I was nothing, that I deserved it. When I finally found the courage to leave, I had nothing. No money, he controlled all of it. No job, he'd made sure of that. No family who believed me, they thought I was exaggerating, being dramatic." Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. "I was sleeping in my car. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I'd spent the last of my cash on gas, trying to get far enough away that he wouldn't find me. And that morning I was standing outside that diner, and I was going to end it." Daniel's chest tightened, his breath shallow. "I had it planned," she continued, tears streaming down her face now. "I knew how. I knew where. I was just waiting for the sun to come up so I could see it one last time." She wiped her eyes with trembling hands. "And then you walked out. And you handed me your breakfast. You didn't ask questions. You didn't look at me like I was broken or pathetic or invisible. You just saw me. You saw that I needed help, and you helped. Even though you clearly didn't have much yourself, she met his eyes. You looked at me like I still mattered, like I was still human, and I thought, if a stranger can care, even just a little, maybe I can care too. Maybe I can try one more day. Daniel's vision blurred. I checked myself into a women's shelter that afternoon, Elena said. I started seeing a counselor. I reached out to an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. She helped me get a restraining order, helped me start divorce proceedings. And every day, when it got hard, and it got so hard, I thought about you. About that moment. About how you gave me something you needed, just because you thought I needed it more. She smiled through her tears. You saved my life, Daniel, and I need you to know that. I need you to understand what you did. Daniel couldn't speak. His throat was too tight, his heart too full. Harmon cleared his throat gently, drawing their attention back. Ms. Castellano recently came into an inheritance from her late mother, with whom she'd been estranged for several years. Before she passed, her mother left a letter expressing regret for not believing Elena when she tried to ask for help. The inheritance was substantial, Elena nodded, and I want to use part of it to help you, because you helped me when you had every reason not to. I can't, Daniel said immediately, shaking his head. I can't take your money. You can, Elena said firmly. And you will, because I've already set it up. Harmon slid the folder across the table. Daniel opened it with shaking hands. Inside were documents, legal papers, trust agreements. A medical trust fund, Harmon explained, to cover your daughter Mia's medical expenses for the next 5 years. Full coverage doctor's visits, medications, emergency care, hospital stays. No co-pays, no out-of-pocket costs. It's irrevocable and protected. Daniel's hand shook so hard he nearly dropped the papers. Additionally, Harmon continued, an education fund for Mia, managed by our firm, dispersed as needed for school supplies, extracurriculars, tutoring, and eventually college. Fully funded through her undergraduate degree. And finally, Elena added, her voice soft, a grant to cover 6 months of your rent and utilities, to give you breathing room, to let you cut back your hours, spend more time with your daughter, maybe take a class or find better work. Daniel stared at the papers, the words swimming in front of him. This isn't real, he whispered. Things like this don't happen. They do, Elena said, reaching across the table to cover his hand with hers. They're happening right now. Please, Daniel, let me do this. Let me give back even a fraction of what you gave me. He looked up at her, tears streaming down his face now. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything, she said, her own tears falling freely. You reminded me that kindness exists, that people still see each other, that there's still good in this world. That's worth more than any amount of money. He sat there, shaking, overwhelmed, unable to process what was happening. All I ask, Elena continued, is that someday, when you can, you pass it on. Help someone else the way you helped me. See someone the way you saw me. That's all. Daniel nodded, unable to speak, unable to do anything but hold on to the papers in his hands like they might disappear if he let go. Okay, he finally whispered. Okay. Elena exhaled, a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh, and squeezed his hand. Thank you, she said. For everything. Thank you, he managed. They sat there for a long moment, two people who'd been drowning, two people who'd reached for each other in the dark, two people who'd decided that kindness mattered more than survival. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel felt something he'd almost forgotten, hope. 6 months later, on a warm Saturday morning in June, Daniel stood in the doorway of a new apartment. Not big, not fancy, but clean, bright, safe. 2 bedrooms, one for him, one for Mia. A living room with actual furniture, Not just a couch he'd pulled from someone's curb. A kitchen with a full-size fridge that didn't rattle and a stove with 4 working burners. A bathroom with consistent hot water and heat that actually worked. Mia's bedroom had a real bed twin size, with a frame and a headboard and a desk her teacher had helped her pick out from a secondhand store. Bookshelves lined one wall, already filling with chapter books and science kits and art supplies. A corkboard hung above her desk, covered with drawings and photos and a ribbon from her school's science fair. She'd won 3rd place. Daniel had cried. He'd cut back to 40 hours a week at the warehouse. The supervisor had been understanding, especially when Daniel explained that he was trying to be more present for his daughter. And with the rent covered, with the medical expenses handled, 40 hours was enough. More than enough. He'd started taking night classes at the community college, VAEC certification. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than warehouse work, and it was a skill that would always be in demand. He was halfway through the program now, top of his class. Mia's asthma was under control. The new medications were working. She hadn't had an A visit in 4 months. She smiled more, laughed more, brought friends home after school to work on projects and watch movies and just be kids. She was thriving. And so, slowly, carefully, was he. Once a month, Elena came over for dinner. She'd rebuilt her life too. A small 1-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. A part-time job at a nonprofit helping domestic violence survivors, women like her, women who needed someone to see them, to believe them, to remind them they weren't alone. She was in therapy twice a week, working through layers of trauma that would take years to fully process. She joined a support group that had become a second family, women who understood without her having to explain. She was still fragile, still healing, still learning how to exist in a world where she didn't have to be afraid all the time. But she was here. She was alive. She was trying. Tonight, they sat around Daniel's small kitchen table, him, Mia, and Elena eating spaghetti and garlic bread that Mia had helped make. Mia chattered about her day, about the book she was reading, about the field trip her class was taking next week. Elena listened with the kind of attention that only people who'd known real loneliness could give. She asked questions, laughed at Mia's jokes, complimented her drawings. After dinner, Mia went to her room to finish her homework, and Daniel and Elena moved to the living room, sitting on the couch with mugs of tea. For a while, they didn't talk. Just sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who've seen each other's worst and decided to stay anyway. "How are you doing?" Daniel asked finally. Elena considered the question, turning her mug in her hands. "Better," she said. "Some days are still hard, but better." "Yeah," he said. "I get that." She smiled. "How about you? How's the class going?" "Good. Really good, actually. I might finish early if I keep up this pace." "That's amazing, Daniel." He shrugged, but he was smiling. "Feels weird to have something to look forward to, you know?" "I do know," she said softly. They sat in silence again. "I've been thinking," Elena said after a moment, "about that morning, about what you said." "What did I say?" "You need it more than I do." She looked at him. "You were wrong, you know?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You needed it just as much as I did," she said. "You were struggling too. You were barely surviving, but you gave it anyway. That's what made it matter. Not that you had extra, but that you didn't, and you still chose kindness." His throat tightened. "I think about that a lot," she continued. "How easy it would have been for you to walk past me, to pretend you didn't see, to tell yourself it wasn't your problem. But you didn't." "I couldn't," he said quietly. "I saw you, and I couldn't look away." "That's what makes you remarkable," she said. "Most people can. Most people do." He shook his head. "I'm not remarkable. I'm just ... I don't know. I'm just trying to do the right thing." "That's what makes you remarkable," she repeated, smiling. Later, after Elena had gone home and Mia was asleep, Daniel stood in his daughter's doorway and watched her breathe. She was sprawled across her bed, one arm flung over her head, her hair a dark tangle across the pillow. Her chest rose and fell in an easy, steady rhythm, no wheezing, no gasping. Just the soft, peaceful sound of a healthy child sleeping. He thought about how close he'd come to losing her, to losing everything. He thought about the woman outside the diner, trembling in the cold. He thought about the choice he'd made, the choice that hadn't felt like a choice at all, just the only possible response to seeing someone in pain. And he thought about how that moment, that single moment of giving away something he desperately needed, had changed both their lives in ways he couldn't have imagined. He'd given her breakfast, she'd given him hope. And maybe that was the point. Maybe that was how the world kept turning, even when everything seemed impossible. Small acts of kindness, passing from one person to another like light through darkness. Not because we have extra, not because it's easy, but because we see each other, because we remember that we're all just trying to survive, and sometimes survival means reaching out, even when we're barely holding on ourselves. Daniel walked to his own room, lay down on his bed, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he'd go to class. He'd work his shift. He'd pick up Mia from school and help her with her homework and make her dinner. Tomorrow he'd keep trying, keep building, keep moving forward. But tonight he let himself feel grateful for second chances, for unexpected blessings, for the kindness of strangers who became friends, for the breakfast he'd given away and the life he'd gotten back. Kindness isn't transactional. It doesn't come with receipts or guarantees or promises of return. Most of the time, you give and you walk away and you never know what happened next, whether it mattered, whether it was enough. But sometimes, rarely, beautifully, impossibly, it comes back to you. Not because you earned it or deserved it or expected it, but because someone else chose to see you the way you saw them, chose to remember, chose to believe that kindness, however small, however costly, is worth passing on. Daniel gave away his breakfast on a cold November morning because he couldn't do anything else, because looking away felt impossible, because someone needed help and he had something to give, even when giving meant going without. He didn't do it for recognition. He didn't do it expecting anything in return. But the universe saw, Elena saw. And when she could, she gave back not just what he'd given her, but a chance at something more, something better, something that looked like hope. That's the thing about kindness. It echoes, it ripples. It grows into something larger than the initial gesture, transforming lives in ways we can't predict or control. All it takes is one person seeing another, one person choosing compassion over convenience, one person believing that we're all worth saving, even on our worst days, especially on our worst days. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even the smallest act of compassion can create ripples that reach farther than we'll ever know, then like, share, comment, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Your support helps us keep sharing these stories, the ones that prove love, kindness, and second chances are still possible, even in a world that often feels too hard, too cold, too broken. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing. And thank you for remembering that every person you pass has a story, a struggle, a reason they need someone to see them. Be that someone. Pass it on.